But the thing which crossed my mind as I looked at those films is how much less British we are than we were on VE Day.
Yeah.
No, I think things are different. In fact, to be honest with you, this is not the country I fought for.
I think it goes without saying that Britain's biggest threat come from those who want to destroy our Christian values, but then do all they can to gaslight us into thinking that preserving our precious culture and saving the United Kingdom from, well, imminent destruction makes us the bad guys. Now, look, there are some very obvious, nefarious actors in all of this. Top of the list, I've got to say, Humza Useless, Scotland's failed former First Minister, who had the temerity to post yesterday, so many sacrificed their lives, not only for our freedoms, but to defeat Hitler's racist ideology. Not only will we remember their sacrifices, but that is the least we can do. We will also honour them by standing against far-right fascism as it rears its ugly head once again. So yeah, an apparently serious former politician comparing, even though he didn't name them, but trust me, he is comparing the rise of Nigel Farage and Reform UK, who I actually think have been far too soft on these issues of mass deportation and demographic change, to the damn Nazis. And it's that dangerous language that stops many people, many sound people actually, from entering this debate. It's the fear of being labelled. Luckily, a 101-year-old war veteran who fought for us to stay free doesn't have those kind of fears. So I think we should listen to his words that things are different and this is not the country I fought for. As Queen Natalie posted on X, bless him, he's right. It's shameful that these people sacrifice themselves for our country and us. For what? Watch.
No, I think things are different. In fact, to be honest with you, this is not the country I fought for. In my opinion, anyway. You know, things are different, and I don't know what would today. I think if the same thing was to happen today with the younger generation, I don't think they would cope as well as we did.
And when you look at this magical footage of old England, just take it in, captured by an off-duty police officer on VE Day 80 years ago, feels impossible to disagree with that veteran. I mean, look at the streets there. Absolutely idyllic. And that was after 5 years, 6 years of the most horrendous war. Now, I know that the streets of London, for example, our capital city, are impossible to walk without the imminent threat of being mugged. And for me, that's proof of a society that has broken down. Seriously, my partner's sister was in London last week. She came down from Scotland. She was in London, I'm not joking, for literally 2 minutes before she was mugged and the phone was swiped from her hand. I repeat, that is a society that has broken down. But where are the commentators and politicians prepared to admit that? Well, stand up Peter Hitchens, who says we are much less English, much less British now than on VE Day 80 years ago, as he urges people to think a lot more about whether we really did win this war and what we can do about restoring and retaining that which is still British about us.
Those films is how much less British we are than we were on VE Day.
Yeah.
I remember there was an interesting minor poet called Priscilla Napier, whose husband was a destroyer captain who actually died of exhaustion in the first months of the Second World War, keeping the seas around this country safe from the Germans. And she at one stage remember saying that what he'd gone to sea for was to make sure his children could grow up British.
Yes.
And I just wonder whether those who in 1939, 1940 set out on the path to what was quite possibly going to be death or serious injury or whatever other disaster, and all the people who sighed and said, okay, right, we're going to endure rationing and privation and everything that's coming for this immense battle. I think all of them had, if they'd been asked for their war aims, the most fundamental one would be that they wanted Britain to remain Britain and for their children to grow up in a country like the one they'd grown up in. And yet this didn't happen. And I know that people think this is a silly obsession in my case, but I don't care. For instance, everybody around me now uses the continental measurements, the meters and the kilograms, and the liters, which are foreign to me. Enormous numbers of things happen in this country in a way which is foreign to me, quite different from my own childhood. And it doesn't seem to me that we succeeded very well in remaining British, either in the big things or in detail. And I just think that the rejoicing is all very well, but the rejoicing without thought afterwards is pointless. And when people have put away the Union Jacks and cleared up the street party debris and all the rest of it, and when the pubs have finally closed, I would just urge people to think a lot more about whether we really did win this war, and what we could do about restoring and retaining that which is still British about us.
Yes.
Because I think that is really the important thing we now face. Before it all goes and vanishes altogether, we really need to consider what we were fighting for rather more profoundly than we have before.
Yeah.
That's my response to the.
I think you're right.
Peter Hitchens, God bless him. I mean, he's a long-winded guy, but I wanted to play that all to you because he said the unsayable in the mainstream media, and I think that always deserves a pat on the back. Now, the self-inflicted harm for failing to protect our border, by the way, that we were able to keep Hitler away from, is insane. So I just want to show you one stat that I think will shock you. By 2030, migrant costs will be £15.3 billion, while Labour's despicable winter fuel payment cut will have saved just £1.7 billion. Even centrist Tory commentators like Nick Ferrari now realise what is causing the absolute decimation of the Uni Party.
What don't they get? This country has had enough with this uncontrolled immigration. It doesn't matter whether it's called the Brexit Party, UKIP or now Reform. Consistently they do well in local elections, by-elections. Governments of both colours say, yes, we've got the message, we're listening. Sir Keir Starmer saying we're going further and faster last week. Well, that's my analogy again. If you're going the wrong way in the M1, I'll tell you what, darling. Let's go. I'm going to up the speed and go even further the wrong way up the M1. Are you nuts? If they vote UKIP, they vote Brexit, they vote Reform. People have had enough, and not enough is being done. March this year, Minister for Border Security and Asylum, God knows what she does all day, Dame Angela Eagle telling a panel of MPs she couldn't put a date on when the use of asylum hotels might end. So let's blame the Conservatives again then. Because it's these people, these Labour politicians, they were living on another planet. It's not as if they'd had 14 years to study the Conservatives' failure, and indeed to lecture us continually on radio shows such as these, in newspaper articles and in the House of Commons. They weren't aware of any of it, because they just visited from another planet, weren't they? No.
And look at that. I think the situation that Nick Ferrari has just summed up has led to these record poll numbers for Reform UK, with its chairman, Zia Youssef, boasting Reform now polling at 33%, almost double the Tories, and 13 points clear of Labour, would result in a walloping Reform majority. History is being written. Matt Goodwin agrees.
And what are they concerned about more than anything? Mass, uncontrolled immigration and our broken borders. It is the number one reason by far why people are voting for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. So it is those unresolved concerns over how immigration is changing Britain, how immigration is changing England, that is why millions of people are now rejecting the established political parties in British politics.
But given our dire state, I will still ask whether Reform UK's policy prescription is strong enough to save us from our predicament. For example, on the issue of mass deportations, it's actually their axed MP, Rupert Lowe, who has changed the national conversation. He's changed the national conversation so much, by the way, that this is a Conservative Party ad. Deport all foreign criminals, which they ran alongside a post on X saying every single one. As Lee Quilter pointed out, amazing how much Rupert Lowe has almost single-handedly shifted the Overton window on immigration and particularly on mass deportations. To see the Conservatives using such blunt but completely correct language would have been unimaginable a year ago. We will only be saved, let me repeat, we will only be saved if all our leaders have the bravery to acknowledge the true shit show we now find ourselves, thanks to politicians in the Uni Party ignoring our demands for 6 decades. Now, let me bring in the superstar panel, politics and royal YouTube sensation Stef the Alter Nerd, and political commentator and free speech advocate Charlie Sansom. Charlie, it's absolutely shocking to me that Humza Useless, this extremist who the mainstream media have allowed a constant and consistent platform, uses a national day like VE Day to try and compare the rise of far-right fascism in the United Kingdom, he's talking about Nigel Farage, to Hitler. But first, the reason you're watching this show is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact-checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And for good reason, given the ongoing debates over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other establishment politicians are portrayed. But I have the solution for you. It's called Ground News, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and manipulative narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. It has been a game changer for a news junkie like me, and you can see for yourself at ground.news/outspoken. But let me show you this incredible website and app in action by looking at the recent story. This has been my favourite story in a long time. UK Supreme Court ruled that women can only be biological adult human females, reversing years of trans extremism. And you can see clearly in one place that over 350 sources around the world are covering this story. Ground News instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether it leans left or right, illustrated by its bias distribution chart. If you scroll down, you can see every headline about the story, along with the political bias and ownership of the publication. So we can see quite clearly for ourselves that on the right, the Daily Wire covered the case very accurately with the headline, UK Supreme Court rules trans-identified men are not women. Spiked Online was even more forthright, declaring women exist, get over it. And the Daily Telegraph looked in depth at the disgraced famous faces who declared trans women are women. By stark contrast, the left-wing National said the result was only a victory for gender-critical feminists, and the Canary ran with the clearly ludicrous headline, victory for the far right as Supreme Court rolls back trans women's rights by 2 decades. My favourite feature on Ground News, though, is their blind spot feed, which surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that receive the majority of coverage from just one side of the political spectrum. So if you love the news like I do, the blind spot feed is the best way to get a balanced perspective on what is happening. This is honestly such a great app. I use it every day, or website, whichever you prefer. Go to ground.news/outspoken or scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble to subscribe today, and check this out. You will get 40% off. 40% off the same Vantage plan I use for unlimited access. That's ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
This is the common trope, isn't it, of the left?
Yep.
It's so easy to mention Hitler and because that evokes some sort of emotion, some sort of disgust and kind of, oh, we can't go there kind of attitude. But at the end of the day, Nigel Farage is nothing like Hitler. Donald Trump is nothing like Hitler. You know, Tommy Robinson is nothing like Hitler. But these men all get called Adolf for reasons unknown. I think it's just lazy. No one on the left can actually objectively put across their points without resorting to that cheap tactic. And I don't know why they do it, because it's becoming lazy. It's becoming boring. You know, people want substance. I think even people on the left, who I'm not a fan of anyway, I'd rather the right win, obviously, but people on the left still need someone to look to and say, yeah, they speak for us. But no one on the left does. They just talk all this rubbish.
Steph, do you understand why there is this desire to try and paint Reform UK, who I actually think attacking to the centre, as far-right fascists.
Yeah, ultimately for me, whenever, he or even, Keir Starmer label anyone or any organisation as far right, it's ultimately an attempt to silence and make that, quote, opposition cower. The thing is, though, the truth is coming out, and their attempts to paint the boogeyman as the far right is over. There was a recent report from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary that has blown their hard on for blaming the far right for pretty much everything completely right open. So His Majesty's Inspectorate of the Constabulary did a report on the Southport protests, and they say, quote, during our inspection, we found no conclusive or compelling evidence that the 2024 disorder was deliberately premeditated and coordinated by any specific group or network. So we now have authorities and reports coming out pretty much turning around and saying anyone in the political sphere trying to blame stuff on the far right, there's no evidence for it whatsoever.
You're completely right. And that report was absolutely sensational, Charlie. But the problem is, the mainstream media that reported those tropes day after day were completely unquestioning when liars like Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer kept trying to blame the unrest after the Southport massacre. I mean, I call them so-called riots, by the way, because I didn't even think they were riots on the whole. But they kept trying to blame this far-right bogeyman, making out as if far-right organisations had invaded these local communities, when actually it was nothing of the sort. It was locals. It was, in a lot of cases, Labour supporters who had just had enough and were also absolutely furious, Charlie, that they knew Starmer and Yvette Cooper were covering up the truth, that the police were covering up the truth. And of course, we know they were, because Starmer and Yvette Cooper absolutely knew that Axel Rudagabana had an Al-Qaeda training manual at his house, that he was producing ricin, for example. So I think the problem with Southport is that it shows that the mainstream media are such a nefarious force that even when they get it wrong, they're not prepared to admit it.
Well, if they admit it, they can't be the beacon of authority or hold that position in society where people still quote the BBC or Sky News or any other network that have been proven to lie on a regular basis. Now, one thing I would say about the mention of the Al-Qaeda manual is that the police would have known about that when they nicked the guy. They would have found it when they arrested him. So why did it take so long for it to come out? People are sick and tired of seeing their kids being attacked, being murdered, being stabbed. We're sick and tired of seeing these things happen on our streets by people who we know are not from this country. They're not from our culture. They don't behave in a way which is becoming of our culture, which is to be tolerant and law-abiding. They don't do any of that stuff. And talking of Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper, I mean, park her for one moment, but you had Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, if I'm not mistaken, taking a knee in their offices when Black Lives Matter were destroying cities in America. That's what you call a riot. That's what you call left-wing extremism, not people being exercised about the murder of 3 children and the injuring of plenty more. That's not a riot. That is justifiable anger.
Oh, yeah, they had absolutely no problem with that because it fit their political narrative, just like there was a time when Keir Starmer was even backing the green lunatics, the eco-terrorists of the Extinction Rebellion, for example. So, Steph, then I come on to Peter Hitchens. And look, in some ways, I find Peter Hitchens on certain issues an insufferable bore. He's also a very cantankerous and difficult man. However, he is someone who is very often prepared to say the unsayable in the mainstream media. And for that, I have huge respect. And isn't he right to say that here we are celebrating VE Day, and of course, we need to mark and commemorate, for example, for me, my 4 grandparents who were all, well, 3 of them fought in World War II. One was living as a teenager throughout the London Blitz. Of course, we need to commemorate them. But isn't he also right to say we need to have a good, hard look at ourselves and think if the country that we have today, a country where you can't even walk around the capital city without being mugged, is really what my grandparents, who you can see there, really fought for.
He's absolutely correct when he turns around and he says that we're much less British now than on VE Day 80 years ago. You only have to literally walk outside your front door to see it. But not only that, you know, consider the statistics. Our legal establishment that we depend on is being eroded bit by bit because the UK is now considered the Western capital for Sharia courts, as we have more than 85 currently operating right here. There was a poll conducted last year that found nearly a third want Sharia law implemented in the next 20 years. Over half polled want homosexuality to be illegal. We're supposed to be a secular country, but as you referenced earlier on, Dan, now they're trying to bring back blasphemy laws through the back door. The government's more focused on looking after illegal immigrants rather than our own British people. Costs to home and provide benefits to illegals, as you mentioned, are set to triple to over 15 billion. But the government wants to save over nearly 2 billion by taking away heating allowance to our pensioners. We're essentially witnessing, as far as I'm concerned, an invasion where the destruction of Britain is happening from within, and we have Keir Starmer and his cronies happily letting it. So anyone, as far as I'm concerned, turning around and saying Peter Hitchens is wrong is what he's saying here, needs to have their head examined.
Yeah, because the thing is, Charlie, obviously there's some people saying, well, it's not a patriotic thing to say, but actually, isn't it patriotic to be honest about the challenges that we face? Because the Uni Party have ignored the will of the people for 6 decades. And we saw, Charlie, in my digest, that 101-year-old war veteran. And it's sad to think, I mean, hopefully he'll be around for a couple more decades, but it's sad to think that at some point we won't have those war veterans around to actually say, this isn't what I fought for.
Well, one thing that I picked up on when Peter Hitchens was talking in the digest was that he said that, did we really win the war? And I think that's an unnecessary conflation. Of course, the war was won, but the
it's what we did with the peace, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, of course. And I think that that's the point that he was trying to make, is that, you know, if in actuality we've invited fascists to come into our country, we're going to pay for them, we're going to look after them, we're going to give them carte blanche, and we're going to make the people that are born here, that didn't have a choice but to be born in Britain, pay for that and suffer alongside those cultures that we don't necessarily want. And I'm not trying to be inflammatory by saying these cultures, but we have to be honest about that. I think to be patriotic, like you said, you have to be honest about the problems the country faces. And denying that we've got a problem with crime, denying we've got a problem with immigration, denying that the government favours foreigners over native-born Brits, that's just the truth. And people need to come to terms with that. And hopefully reform, as you mentioned it again in your digest, hopefully they'll come to the forefront and be the reckoning on the country that it needs. But we'll have to wait and see about that.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.